Well, welcome back, everybody. We are so thrilled to be joining you once again. My name is Devora Governale,
And I'm Carrie Parker.
and we are so thrilled to be here in February and in the wonderful month that it is, and being able to celebrate Black stories always. So, we are coming to you with one of our favorite stories that was written back when we were very little. And actually, when I was trying to remember, we were in college back when the musical was actually being written. It was in production.
The
So in
stage
my
musical.
mind, yep, Color
Yep.
Purple and Raisin in the Sun kind of got joined together in my memory of our drama literature 2 days when we had to do that coursework.
Yep.
And this is such a classic piece of literature and piece of history. And we're just so thrilled to be able to dive into that with you today. I'm going to turn it over to Carrie.
Awesome. So the color purple for me is a sentimental attachment as well because I actually was introduced to the color purple in high school in English class. So we were talking about that and the reality that, we see the memes now about what radicalized you. Honors English radicalized me. Hi, Ms. Zank. Girl, thank you so much, right? Like knowing that our teachers and our academics, they are our people who help us see and experience these stories that otherwise might not come across our path and teach us to learn from them. So I actually did a report on Alice Walker and then read The Color Purple, and that was one of my high school projects. So I watched the movie around that time, and then I've just loved the story ever since. So there are multiple angles that we will approach that with because one of the reasons why The Color Purple is so impactful. So Alice Walker wrote it. It was published in 1982. She won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the National Book Award for Fiction in 1983. So ultimately, this story is a historical fiction, but it hits so many marks on the representation checklist. So the idea that the story is about Celie, who is a poor African American girl in Georgia in the early 1900s. We start in, I think it's 1909. So we start with the idea that this is a Black story about those who are post-Civil War and in America and families trying to make it. And we meet Celie and her sister Nettie, and they are living with their pa. Celie and Nettie were each other's lifelines through this. But so Alice Walker herself has quite the career. It involves being a writer as well as an activist. She was actually engaged in activism. Her husband, who is Melvin R. Leventhal, was actually involved with Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement, and they were one of the first interracial couples in their state. So she was born in 1944. So thinking of where she was, stage of life, as all of these historical situations are going down, and then the fact that she also wrote this book in the 80s is her ode to respecting that journey and knowing that she came in down the road. So the story of Celia and Nettie is almost more her parents' range of being adults going through those situations at those ages. So Spielberg, he did it in 85. So from publishing to movie, it was 3 years. That's a pretty quick turnaround, right? But also a very young Jewish director who is coming up in the world, and his big name in the sky was Jaws, right? And now he's taking on this story about Black existence in the South in the early 1900s. And it's an interesting impact because we love, love, love Steven Spielberg for the fact that he has some very quintessential things he uses in his movies. Different style. He loves shadow play. That's one of the things that he's known for. We see the shadow work in Celia and Nettie come up with a plan where they're never going to be separated. We see it in shadow, and then we zoom out to see Danny Glover standing outside the door of the room the shadows are in. So we love Steven Spielberg for how quintessential and wholesome his movies were, even when dealing with such heavy topics. The fact that he made this movie in the 80s and how many topics are covered in it, because one, within the first 15 minutes, we're talking about rape and incest, right? That, I mean, so Celie, from the beginning, men are trying to make her feel the shame, guilt, and responsibility for their actions. It starts very, very young in her life. So we get a fast forward. Our original Celie is swapped out for Whoopi Goldberg. This was her first film. That was such an impactful story and representation. Again, very, very bold for a story about African Americans being directed by a young Jewish director in the
In
80s. So,
1985. Yes, in
yep.
1985. And that moment, because I went back and I watched the musical and then went back to refresh myself because it had been so long since I'd seen Spielberg's version. I couldn't really remember almost anything. And I was trying to remember, I was like, wow, 1985, how was that scene done? And, I really appreciate that he did, because that was an essential part, moment for that character. That was her first consensual, intimate moment of her life, her very first consensual one. And so I think that you can't tell this story without giving that moment for that character. So I was so relieved. I was like, okay, that's right. Steven Spielberg did this scene. It can't be her full story without that moment.
Right.
So I'm so grateful.
And it's in the book, it is so impactful. And I love how the ways the stories are told, it's like people always make the complaint about not wanting things to be too obvious with LGBTQ representation, et cetera, et cetera. That reality of it's a gradual, like you see it. You see the connection, you see the love, you see the intimacy, you see the being a safe place for each other, right? And it just seems so natural. It doesn't seem like it's a trope, right? Like it's being done just for the purpose of having it added to the story. It is genuinely in there because it's the most organic thing to happen. We do know she was obviously under some substance abuse issues, and she ends up at their house, and that's where Celie and Shug connect for the first time, and that whole entire relationship builds from there. And Shug has the freedom that Miss Celie always wanted, but that she didn't feel like she was able to have. She had been told and had it reinforced in so many ways that she was not equal in that manner. She didn't have control or command over herself or the power to do so. And so,
I mean, the two partners she had at that point, when she does meet Shug, have been something that has only been a negative experience for her. That's all it is. And in the musical version, after her and her husband, Mr. or Alfred, consummate their relationship that first night, literally what she rolls over to look at is the photo of Shug on their nightstand. I mean,
yep.
you've got that connection that's already being made right away. And I know Whoopi Goldberg has the line of, wait, you want to be intimate with him? Like she's so thrown off by that. She cannot even fathom that being desirable or positive in any way, shape, or form. She's like, I don't ever want to have anything to do with him. And I feel like I have no choice because I was forced into this loveless marriage with him. And so I feel like I have to do this thing and I hate it. I can't even imagine that you love it. So yeah, just to see that whole like dynamic and the complexity within that. Yeah. 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 I mean, Steven Spielberg's film was just absolutely incredible, just groundbreaking in so many ways for so many years. And then of course, like I was saying earlier, when we were actually attending our theater program in Florida at UCF, we were there while the book and that Steven Spielberg film was being translated into and produced into a live stage musical. You had this fantastic cast that opened it up. It only ran for a couple of years. It then did go into tour for a little bit. And that was actually when Fantasia joined it. So Fantasia actually has been Celie for, literally a decade and a half. She has played that role. So did it on the tour and then was in the 2023 film. You had Cynthia Erivo, who in 2013 was off West End and then came for the revival. So it was about 10 years after it initially was on Broadway. You had the revival that came back. You had Cynthia, and then you also had Jennifer Hudson. So they were just this power duo bringing this story back to life, which was amazing. And then, of course, you did have the 2023 film version. You did have one other holdover. You had Danielle Brooks, who was our Sophia. So just like Fantasia, she was on stage and in the film.
Cynthia Erivo won the Tony for The Color Purple. So her Tony Award is playing Celie in The Color Purple.
As well she should. I mean, she was so powerhouse in that role. I know we now all, know her and love her as Elphaba, but yeah, that was this just massive role that she did both in London and here in the United States. So just a powerhouse cast for these three main women as we hit 2023 and the musical made its screen debut. I love that you took some really powerful moments from the book. And that became some of the big musical numbers. You have the musical number I'm Here. You get to see that with Whoopi Goldberg in the back of the car. She drives away, I'm here. And just that proclamation. I know she's saying it to someone else, but it's like she's really saying it about herself. So you get I'm Here. You get Hell No. So that song. We have this
very oh my gosh.
Yes, this very powerful message we get continually from Sophia, where Celie is so meek and kind of receives the abuse that she's getting. She is more afraid to stand up. Sophia is the opposite. She is going to stand up. She is not going to, take any physical or emotional abuse, verbal abuse. We do see the consequences that she winds up paying for that she shouldn't have had to when she stands up to the mayor's wife and is extremely insulted by the mayor's wife when she insists that she come and be a maid in her household. And of course, the arrogance of this woman to think that she's being so kind and offering something so wonderful.
The white savior.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly how she's seeing it. And Sophia's like, oh, no. And she pays such horrible consequences for that, which she did not even remotely deserve. Having those healthy boundaries, was separated from her family. I want to say they actually said 6 years in the musical, even though they said 8 in Spielberg's version. But of course, that was a lot of psychological trauma that she then endured for far longer than she ever should have. I mean, it shouldn't have happened for 1 second, really. And then even when she gets out, she still continues to have to be berated emotionally and verbally by this horrible woman. They do a much shorter version of it in the musical film than they do in Spielberg.
Mm-hmm. But in the Spielberg one, it's it makes sense that The Color Purple is seen as a story of 3 women, and that those women are Sophia, Shug, and Celie.
Yeah. Nettie functions more as kind of the bookend character as far as, what we see of her. I know we get some of her story through her letters in the middle of the film, but for the most part, she's this bookend character. And then you also have Mary Agnes, which is another female character that she's obviously not prominently shown, but she does provide representation for, again, some of what these women are enduring that is just not okay. Well, and how powerful is that moment? Because here she has been with him. We see, like you said, we get the title cards that tell us how many years have passed. It's a lot of years. And she's probably saved him, once a week, a couple times a month or what have you, for years and years and years. And, what is it that pushes her to the brink that this is when she actually does come at him a couple times? And, it's the fact that this is the moment that's after she's discovered that those letters, the one little bit of joy she could have had. And not only is it the letters from her sister, is that she learns that while she has essentially given her life to this horrible human that treats her less than human, as well as serving other people around her. She has done so much good in the situation she found herself in. And that's one of the beautiful things of her character, is how much good she does despite the pain that she's in. But her sister, on the other hand, like you said, she doesn't take a partner. It's like her I don't know if sacrifice is the right word, but her sacrifice that she winds up making is that she essentially becomes the mother to her niece and nephew for her sister, because she saw the pain her sister endured to have her two children ripped away from them, by the birth father. And, when she realized that she was there with these two little babies that were everything to her sister, it was like that was the way she could give love to her sister, was to raise her sister's children when she could not. Oh, yeah. So many moments of sobbing, ugly cries on the sofa.
The most ugly crying last night. I mean, honestly, there's always one moment where I just go, yep, there it went. There's the breaking of the dam, and now we're not going to stop crying for like 2 hours.
We were talking earlier about that dinner table scene, and when Shug comes essentially to rescue Celie, she's finally got kind of the home and the full level of means to be able to get Celie out of there. And in the musical version, my favorite part of that scene is actually as the scene is ending. And so at this point, the entire dining room has cleared, and we get this shot that is the side of the dining room table, and you're seeing the father and you're seeing Alfred, you're seeing Mr. And they're just sitting there kind of in stunned silence, just looking at each other from the long ends of the table. And I think that that is such a powerful moment that we get in the musical, because, I mean, I know we've been talking about some generational trauma here. What more like powerful visual representation that you're seeing these two men, and they're so stunned, they cannot believe they've witnessed what they've just witnessed, because a woman has never stood up for herself like that in front of them. They've always been able to be powerful enough to bring them back down. And in this moment is the first moment in their life that they actually were overpowered by a woman, verbally, almost even physically. And, I think that official moment, obviously, Mr. was losing his stronghold from the moment that Celie got those letters back. He was on a slippery slope downward. But the moment that he lost any last little shred of credibility he didn't have was when he pointed to her and said, "And your cooking isn't even any good." Because, of course, that's kind of the one compliment she actually receives pretty freely throughout most of the film. When she first moves in, the kids immediately are like, "Oh my gosh, this food is so good. I need thirds. I need fourths." Like, she's told her whole life, Shug throws Mister's food across the floor, but she gobbles up Celie's food. I mean, that is one clear pattern she's been able to have. She is an excellent cook. So for him to look at her and say, "Your food isn't even good," you're like, yeah, you're just grasping at straws. I can't take anything seriously, because you're just emotional at this point. There's nothing logical or truthful about anything that you're saying. You lost whatever last little smidge you may have had by saying something so ridiculous. But I also appreciate that you have the two generations. You got father, son sitting at the table, but then the next generation down, Harpo, he actually left and followed. He's kind of created this dynamic that's not very healthy for Mary. And so she's like, "I'm out of here too. I'm going with them. I'm gone. I'm getting in the car. Like, I'm out too." And Harpo actually follows. He's not successful in getting her to stay, and they don't wind up together. And that's fine, and honestly for the best. But I do love that moment in the storytelling where we're starting to see just the small little evidences of some reparations to this generational trauma, where you've got the three men in three different generations, and the two are just sitting there stunned, but the third generation is physically up and trying to be active in repairing his mistakes.
And he keeps trying to do what he has done the entire time, which is invalidate her and discredit her and try to steal her power, distinguish her power. And she is just like, nope. And the fact that she just even does a hand thing, it's a Jedi hand thing, but for real, like she just does it, and he stops and he goes, that's the moment where he went, oh, snap.
Yeah. So the musical is phenomenal. Of course, my favorite musical number, of course, they've got, The Color Purple, which I was sobbing at the end. Also a beautiful portrayal of that scene where they're just all in white and they're around this tree, and you've got the tables, that the tablecloths are all these quilts she's been making through the years. And, to be a part of this circle and a surrounded life, that also is such a beautiful visual. I love both versions, Spielberg's and the musical version. But my favorite song is Celie's Fancy Pants. I just think that as a costumer, I love so much the visual that's given, because here now we're just post-war, so we're mid to late 40s, and so we're starting to hit that era when women were starting to kind of be allowed, or it's becoming more acceptable for women to wear pants. In previous decades, you could have never worn pants in public. And so to me, the representation through this costume piece and through that specific era in time, that she is a woman who now owns property, and she owns a home, and she owns a store. And that was a big deal. That was a massive deal. That was not something that was accomplished by many women, let alone Black women. There are a few examples. Biddy Mason is one of my favorite historical figures that by the time she passed away, she was the richest female in California. But to have, what does she choose to turn this store into? She chooses to sell pants and has a whole musical number. I love a costume change. She rips off her red pants and there's those sequin pants underneath. Oh, I just love that so much. I will say, costume designer, you did an amazing job, but I will admit to you, I didn't love Mr.'s pants. It just, to me, felt a little more modern than the sequin and metallic fabrics of the 40s. But other than that pair of pants, I loved all of the fancy pants in her store. And the fact that that is how she is empowered. And gosh, that visual, costume-wise, costume history-wise, what that represented for them as empowerment as women. And the fact that because she couldn't have her sister with her, sewing wound up being literally the only little micro comfort she had. It was the one thing she got to take with her from her childhood that she loved. She had her mother's sewing kit. And you see in the musical, you constantly see her sewing things. You're seeing her sewing quilts. She crochets a sweater for Sophia when she's in jail. She is constantly sewing. So that is one other compliment she gets, is what a wonderful stitcher that she is. And so, yeah, she takes just that symbol of peace and power and love, and she creates this world for her that she, like you said before, she's finally able to be at peace and be able to reach this point in her life where it's her life. So, I love the musical. Sobbed like a big baby. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Both are incredible. The book is incredible. So grateful to Alice Walker for making sure that we had this in the world, and to the filmmakers that put it in that very powerful art form of film, so that it can continue to inspire generation after generation.
This is what I'm talking about. The fact that and especially through Sophia, we saw such an interesting story, and the reality that the ingrained misogyny, right? The ingrained power dynamic, power dominant system in the men over women in that family line, that they will beat them, right? And the fact that in the beginning of the marriage, Sophia she's outspoken and she's very self-empowered and she knows her value and worth. And then she marries Harpo, and then Harpo's talking to dad and everybody about he doesn't know how to control her. And dad says, beat her. And then when he talks to Celie, Celie says, beat her. And the reality that Celie said that, and Sophia comes to her after that and is like, I had to fight men. I've had to fight my brothers. I've had to fight constantly. But the fact that I have to fight in my own home and
Yeah, when I
Celie,
swore I was never going to do that. And Celie does acknowledge, I'm so jealous because you guys have a better dynamic in your relationship than I do with my husband. And some of it came out of that jealousy and that desire for her life to get better. And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we see someone else having something we wish we had, and we don't feel like we can do anything about it. And so rather than trying to rise up, we pull them down with us. And it's such a human thing to lean into an instinct like that. And we have to fight that one. That is not healthy. That is not productive. You know, we have to be mindful if we're leaning into a choice like that and stop. Because that, yeah, it literally shifted all the dynamics for Sophia's life after that.
I think though that was Celie's wake-up call. I think the fact that we saw that play out helped create Celie's growth until the fact that she's able to finally have her worth, her value, and then assert herself and say, I'm going with Shug. You've been nothing. I've asked you for nothing, not even your hand in marriage. The the idea that she asserts that, and that being how Sophia goes, I'm home, is that journey from that moment when Sophia tells her, you told him to beat me, to Celie stand. It's their roles reversed, right? The idea that Sophia was the outspoken one. Sophia was the one holding the men accountable, and Celie was enabling the abusive system.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. And that really was kind of the beginning. She has that moment. And then, of course, she has her experience with Shug, where she's able to have her first consensual intimacy. And then by the time we get to Shug kind of rescuing her and she's doing the curse on Mr., soon after is when her father passes away. And that, you know, now that she's been through these chapters that have helped with the growth that she's needing towards freedom and towards peace, inner peace, that final moment is when she goes to the father's funeral and when she finds out that that man wasn't actually her biological father, that that man was actually her stepfather. And everything happened when she was young enough that she didn't remember that. She didn't know that. And this moment that she has where she just stands there, and that's the moment when because she just has never felt loved. She just has felt like she's never been worthy of love. She's never felt love. She's mistreated by her husband. She's mistreated by those kids. She's mistreated by, like you said, the town that even calls her ugly. She's never felt love. And the sister that she has felt love from has been literally on the other side of the world for most of their lives at this point. But that moment is such a massive revelation for her of, I did have a birth father who loved me, and I did have a mother who loved me, but they were gone by the time I could remember that. And the children I have are not my siblings. They're my children with some other random guy
That one was huge.
And all of that shift in reality for her was that final, it gave her that final ability to step over the threshold. You know, she now has the property restored from her actual birth father. You know, she's had this journey through these experiences. And of course, she gets the cherry on top with the sister later, but that moment really is when she crosses the threshold into true inner peace and empowerment for herself. And I do think that that is why this story has meant so much to so many generations, like you've talked about. It is extremely relevant still today, even though the events of this, like you said, historical fiction takes place approximately a century ago. It's still very relevant because we all have to go down our life journey and go through our experiences that can help us with the same thing we're all seeking the same thing as Seeley. We are all seeking inner peace, and we are all seeking a sense of empowerment, and we are all seeking to build a life structure for ourselves where that can be a perpetual state of existence for us. And that is why this story has been so powerful for, for those of us who've been able to watch it and or read it. And it's why it will continue to endure and benefit so many generations to come. And thank heavens for the art of film that just helps that continue forward more and more and more and more. And the book.
Making sure that we acknowledge those struggles and their reality and voices, because that's the only way we know what needs to get fixed in our world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
She can wish him peace, but by knowing that what he was doing with her was not marriage or love. That was none of the above. And learning what that actually looks like or means. So that was super impactful because it did help bring the representation of misogyny, abuse, how those relationships are role modeled generation to generation through his family line, through her family line, how the men were treating the women, like you said, that it started to change with Harpo, but also that every generation can make a step, but the whole entire hope is to learn and grow. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. But they both Shug and Seeley left him because he never did learn how much he was hurting her. He never changed. He was childish all the way through, and that's what ultimately cost him. He wouldn't let go of this belief that he had to be above her. He couldn't choose to be partners and equals. She had to be under. Nothing worked that way.
No. I mean, everybody wants to have healthy relationships, whatever those relationships are, whether it's professional ones at work or with your parents or siblings or, other family members or with a significant other. Everyone wants healthy relationships. And man, if we learn anything from Mr., it's the exact opposite of what to do to have a healthy relationship. And hopefully to feel inspired that if you are enduring treatment like that, that you can find the pathway and the avenues to putting the boundaries in your life that will cease that from being part of your reality, part of your truth.
Yeah.
Oh, girl, this is a film. This is a story with a lot to unpack and a lot that can be connected to and a lot that can be learned from. Whew. Well, hopefully we can keep using film to lend its ability to help with that, because film does have a really wonderful power in that. So we'll just keep sharing film and trying to help make the world a better place through it. That's for sure.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has just been such a delight to be able to dive into this story that is so powerful and so intense and really can do so much for us. We definitely want to hear what you think and what you have to say. Just being able to connect and be able to share is, what we are here for and what we strive for with Maven Cinemas. So we cannot wait to see you again for the next one. Thank you for joining us with this one.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.